I'm Phil Ralston with the Port of Portland, and I sit on 2 of the drainage district's boards here locally. And the definition of beneficiaries of these systems has, ultimately an impact on what kind of funding mechanisms you might go for and the governance structures that you might use to, obviously manage the systems into the future. Do you have a sense through your experience of what's a practical definition of beneficiaries of a system? I'm assuming it's not just the folks that live inside the boundaries of the levees, but broader communities benefit from the activities inside the levees that are protected in many cases. But do you have a sense of what's sort of a good practical definition of beneficiaries?
In California, we've been pretty hamstrung because our state constitution defines beneficiaries in a pretty narrow way. And so we really have looked primarily at landowners, particularly within the boundaries of the levees. However, if you're familiar with the geography, just southwest of Sacramento is the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, which is one of the 5 largest deltas in the US. And it's an amazing area with reclaimed islands that, due to subsidence and peat evaporation, now the land is 20 feet below sea level, so it's kind of like Louisiana or some areas in the Netherlands. And it's a vital area for fish habitat and passage. There are railroads that go through it. There are water supply pipelines and canals that go through it. And the reason I bring it up is our state legislature recently passed a law saying it is a unique area, and we can't just assess the people within the delta for the benefits of improving the levees, because if that levee fails, it changes the flows and you can't get fresh water to Southern California. If the levee fails, it sucks the fish in and you don't get habitat. If the levee fails, the railroad can't get through for a year. And so there's actually on the streets right now an RFP from the state agency saying, please propose to us how you would handle this. What are the beneficiary pools that you would look at as a consultant if you wanted to create something like this? So I've started thinking about this very issue because we might be on one of the teams that's competing for that work. But it's the Delta Protection Commission is this California entity, and you could Google and find the RFP, and you could track and see how they're handling it. I've certainly felt that any definition that just looks at landowner is too narrow, and we've, as I said, been hamstrung under California law by this. Coming up with a formula for how you allocate the benefits is challenging, but there are all sorts of experts at doing this. If you've heard of a scrub analysis, separable cost remaining benefits, the Bureau of Reclamation does scrub analyses. When it builds a dam, when it builds Bonneville, all those facilities, it says, how much of the capital cost do we allocate to water supply from water behind the dam? How much do we allocate to fisheries as a result of the fish ladder? How much do we allocate to power as a result of the power that's produced? And so there are consulting firms and government experts and professors that can do those kinds of methodologies, and I think we just have to apply it in this arena as well.
Next question. While people are thinking about their question, let me ask one, Scott. The folks in the Portland area working on the Columbia levee systems are looking at not just accreditation by FEMA, but also trying to kind of coordinate that with remaining qualified for the Corps of Engineers rehabilitation and inspection program. So we're looking, we don't want to go through 2 processes, we want to go through that once. Has that been something that you've experienced or seen in some of these other projects, and are there any recommendations or suggestions you would make along that line?
Yeah, so you're referring to the PL 8499 core program, which for federal authorized levees provides that in the event of a levee failure, the Corps is always there helping us fighting. And then in the event that the levee actually fails, the Corps is there as a partner helping us rehabilitate as long as we're in the program. And there are increasingly difficult criteria to stay in the program. In fairness, they've probably always been there, but they haven't been enforced, and now they're being enforced. And so in the communities that I'm familiar with, Those communities are primarily making use of SWIFTs, which are the system-wide, Kevin help me, system-wide improvement framework, thank you, system-wide improvement framework. And this is a process whereby you can apply to the Corps and say, we intend to do a SWIFT. Here's information that demonstrates that we're serious about it. And if the Corps believes you're serious about it, you're back in the program for a 2-year period while you actually develop a plan that shows how you're going to remain in compliance. It doesn't require that you get to compliance by the end of the 2 years. It requires that you have an improved plan that has a good faith way of getting to compliance. And so for my communities, what we've done where we run into this problem is we apply for the SWIFT, and then once the intention is approved, we develop the plan, and the plan is a plan, frankly, we're already doing. That's why we're improving the levees, and we align it with the PL 8499 program to stay in the rehabilitation program.
Great, thanks. Other questions?
Colin Stelzig with the City of Warrenton. Could you talk a little bit about the difference between the accreditation and the certification process? Because if you don't need to do improvements or large improvements to your levee, we're aiming towards doing the accreditation instead of certification with the Corps. Maybe just talk a little bit more about that, and if you know the difference.
Yeah, this is one of those fun areas where I get to play engineer. I'm actually an attorney. The separation between the two is a certification is an engineer certifying that a levee meets certain standards. Either it's been constructed to meet those standards, or the engineer has done an investigation that meets acceptable standards for the engineer to say it's within the margin of error of what it should be. And then the accreditation is the process whereby FEMA comes in and says, I see you've certified it. You also have your interior drainage plan. You also have an O&M manual. You also have X, Y, and Z. Now I accredit the levee as providing protection. And when you have levees accredited all the way around or as against the water, then the land comes out of the floodplain. And so where the Corps does the certification, the Corps would then hand the certification to FEMA. Where a local engineer does it, the local engineer would hand the certification to FEMA. Under Corps guidance that came out about 3 years ago, I think Corps certifications have a 10-year expiration date on them now. And so that's one of the things to consider is if you go with a Corps certification, 10 years later, you're going to need an update of some sort. It's not clear to me whether you do a whole new one, whether as the locals you say to the Corps, nothing's changed, come to an inspection, and then they recertify. But there is a lifespan on that certification. Some professional engineers will give you a certification without a lifespan because their point isn't that it's good forever, but that 10 years is an arbitrary date, and it's the responsibility of the local community to inform FEMA if something changes. And so with a private certification, you might get an accreditation that lasts longer. Have I answered your question? Yeah. Okay.